Hello, and welcome to the Movie Universe. I'm your host, Movie Fan. Today for this new Dare to Compare video, I'm going to be doing something that has never been done before, at least to the best of my knowledge. I'm going to be comparing a movie to a video game, and that is The Golden Compass. Now, before I get started, I want to make something very clear. I will not be comparing like the gameplay versus the movie. That's irrelevant. Instead, I'm going to be comparing the story that's in the game compared to the story that is in the movie. Again, to the best of my knowledge, this has never been done before, but this is such an unusual thing that I feel that if it's not been talked about, it needs to be discussed. And yes, I'm quite aware that the movie was based off of a book, but that has been talked to death. And I have never read the books. I've researched them, I'm familiar with the story, and that's pretty much where I lie on the subject. I will reference them every now and again, but that's it. Now, I'm sure there's a lot of people who are actually familiar with this movie because it wasn't made that long ago. In fact, it was only made in 2007. And even now, you could still find people talking about it online. However, if you haven't seen the movie, I'll give you the overview. The story takes place in another dimension where the people have their souls outside their bodies in the form of animals, called demons. Our main character, Lyra Belacqua, lives at Jordan College in Oxford with her uncle, Lord Asriel. He's a great professor who's studying a substance called dust. It appears to flow through demons, and it seems to live up in the north, right where the northern lights are. What it does? That we do not know in this movie. That was left open for the sequel that never happened. But what we do know is the Magisterium, which controls the entire world, hushed it up for years. But then Lord Asriel started digging into the subject, and now they want to talk with him. In fact, they even kidnap him later on his trip to the north. Meanwhile, Lyra meets a woman called Mrs. Kunter, who pretty much adopts her from Jordan College and takes her home with her. But before Lyra leaves the college, the head professor gives her a device called an enethiometer, or a golden compass, as it's also called. What does it do?
It lets you glimpse what is to come.
Things go well at Mrs. Kunter's for a little while, but then she realizes that she's not all that she appears to be, because Mrs. Kunter is a member of the Magisterium, and even worse, she is working on an experiment that involves the kidnapping of children. And because of this, Lyra runs away. But before she could be captured by the Magisterium, she's saved by a group of seafaring people known as Egyptians. They take Lyra with them, and they explain why. Her uncle is a friend of theirs, and most importantly, the Magisterium has been taking their children to be experimented on, and none of them have ever returned. Lyra uses the compass to learn where they need to go, a place called Bolvangar, and on their journey, she meets Serafina Pekkala, who's a leader of the witches. She also meets an aeronaut named Lee Scoresby and an armored bear named Yorick Burnison. They agree to go with Lyra and to help her rescue those kids. And along the way, Lyra learns what they're doing to these kids. They're cutting away their demons. She's then kidnapped by a group of people called Somalians who live up north, and she's taken to the kingdom of the Ice Bears, where she's given as a gift to their king. Yorick goes to save her, but he knows he's going to be in great danger because that was his home and he's in exile, and if he dares go back, they will kill him. Lyra manages to trick the king into thinking that she's a demon, and if he kills Yorick, then she will be his forever. In the end, Yorick kills the king, and now he is the king of the Ice Bears. Shortly after that, he takes her to Bolvangar. They get separated along the way, though, but she goes into Bolvangar, she gets the kids, they lead an escape, but before they escape, she learns the truth about Mrs. Kunter and about Lord Asriel. Apparently, they are her parents. After Lyra learns this, she makes her escape along with the other children, but not before destroying the machine that separates the demons from the people. And here's where things really get fun. There's a regiment of guards called Tartars who try to force them to go back. Fortunately, Yorick Burnison, the Egyptians, Lee Scoresby, and the witches all arrive and kill the Tartars. And in the end, there's a big speech about how Lyra is going to decide the fate of the world, because the Magisterium does not want to just control this world. They want to control all worlds in every universe. Lord Asriel is close to figuring out how to open the door, and the key is dust. And that's where the movie ends. The video game followed the story pretty closely. However, there were quite a few things that came up that were very different compared to the movie. For instance, the storyline in the game is exactly the same in the movie, up until the part where they meet Yorick Burnison and Lee Scoresby. In the movie, they put it down that Lee Scoresby told Lyra about Yorick Burnison, and technically he manipulated her into helping him get his armor back. And he says a pretty strange line, quote unquote, "I didn't have the notion how to spring you. Fortunately, little girls come in real resourceful in these parts." Now, I've been thinking about that for a while, and I can think of a few possibilities as to what that means. Either the Ice Bears have a weakness for little girls, or there's something really sinister going on here that involves, you know what, I don't even want to think about that. It's too disgusting to talk about. They do use a bit of that footage, but they chop it up just to get to the point. And in the game, Lee Scoresby doesn't really mention about Yorick Burnison. Lyra learns about Yorick through the townspeople, because he's been living there for a while. And here's where things start to get interesting. When Lyra is kidnapped by the Somalians, in the game, she's not taken to the Ice Bears. She's taken to Bolvanger. And from what I've been able to dig up, that is how it really was in the book. And after that great epic battle at Bolvanger, they get caught up in a storm, and Lyra falls off the ship and is captured by the Ice Bears. And the game even says something really interesting. Lord Asriel, he wasn't being held captive by the Magisterium. He was being held captive by the Bears. Or so it seemed. Because in the game, Lyra catches up with Lord Asriel, and then she learns the horrible truth. Lord Asriel plans to use her friend as the key to opening the door to other dimensions. And the game ends with her heading to the Northern Lights to try to stop him. What's really interesting about the game is the fact that you are clearly seeing footage that was not used in the movie. In fact, the game is more accurate to the book than the movie was. And that's really odd, because I have never heard of anything like this ever happening before. We've all heard of video games that had nothing in common with the movie, but I have never seen a time where a movie had absolutely nothing in common with the book, and yet the video game has more in common with the book than the movie does. So for this dare to compare, the real winner would have to be the game compared to the movie, because it's actually more accurate to the book. And I'll be honest, when I saw the movie, I was confused about quite a few things going on here, because it made no sense to me as to why the Somalians delivered Lyra to the Bears instead of Bolvanger. Whereas for here, it turns out they deliver her to Bolvanger, and then she's captured by the Bears later on. That makes perfect sense. Why the director decided, nah, I'm going to change it around, is beyond me. In fact, I don't know if anybody has an answer for this. In fact, this was one of the movie's biggest downfalls, was the fact it had very little in common with the book. Now, the book, from what I've been able to research, it's very complicated because, you're talking about traveling into other dimensions, and not to mention your soul is outside of your person, and the characters in the book were more complex than they were in the movie. As one reviewer said, the trilogy was a story that kills God. It had a lot of anti-religious fervor going on in there. Because of this fact, the director cut a lot of that out so he wouldn't offend anybody. I can understand that, but I don't understand why he changed where Lyra was captured by the Somalians and taken to Bolvanger, and instead she's taken to the Bears. That makes no sense at all. Another big question that has come up for me is, if they decided to change it the way they did, why didn't Yorick come with the Ice Bears, and we had the Bears and the Egyptians and the witches and Lee Scoresby are all together fighting the Tartars? I mean, heck, if he was going to change it the way he did, he should have just went all in and brought the Bear Army in on this as well. Sure, it would have lasted for barely 5 seconds, but I imagine it would have been pretty epic. Not that this battle wasn't epic to begin with. It just would have been better, and it would have made a lot better sense. Because if you think about it, he's king now. He can get the Bear Army to come with him. He should have done that. So why didn't he? And speaking of bears, why is it that Yorick decided to take her to Bolvanger alone instead of having everyone come with him? You see my point as to how illogical that is? He could have brought the Bear Army there and stormed the place. There is absolutely no purpose, no rhyme, no reason to Yorick and Lyra going to Bolvanger alone. As you may have already figured out, the director butchered the story big time. And it was because of this that the sequels were never made. As gripping as the story was, and as amazing as the special effects were, so amazing in fact they actually won an Oscar for it, the people who never read the book, myself included, were confused as to what the story was about. And people who read the book were greatly offended as to how much the director butchered it. So it's no wonder why I say the video game actually beats the movie, because the story is on par with the book, and it actually uses the footage that they decided not to use in the movie. Footage that was on par with the story. This is so unbelievable that it really, truly defies all explanations I cannot even come up with an answer as to why the heck they decided, let's not use this footage for the movie, but we'll use it for the video game. I'm sure that added to the confusion. I wouldn't be surprised. Now, I know I've been bashing the movie because of all this, but I got to admit, the movie was pretty darn good. It had a pretty decent story up until the points where the director butchered it, where it made no sense, and it had a really solid cast. Nicole Kidman plays Mrs. Coulter, Daniel Craig plays Lord Asriel, Eva Green plays Serafina Pekkala, the legendary Ian McKellen is the voice to Yorick Burnison, and Lee Scoresby is played by the one and only Sam Elliott. Great cast. If there was a flaw in the cast, it would definitely have to be Dakota Blue Richards, who plays Lyra Blackwa. She acts way too obnoxious, way too headstrong, she annoys me to tears, and she seems to be, well, a real brat. I know that having kids in movies, especially as main characters, is not easy because they're not professionals. They've not been professionally taught, at least not most of them. In fact, it's always a gamble to use kids in a movie. And this was her first movie, and to the best of my knowledge, this was her last movie, at least in America. Supposedly in Britain, there's a few roles that she's been in, but after this movie flopped big time, people were really bashing her here, so I highly doubt she'll ever be seen in a real Hollywood film ever again. I suppose she could be in a certain magazine that was once owned by Hugh Hefner, judging by the way she looks now, but the odds of her coming into Hollywood ever again are slim and none. Of course, fans of the book will be happy to know that they're actually rebooting it into a TV series on Netflix, and it is set to come out this year, and with a whole new cast, which means no Dakota Blue Richards to ruin it. So, have you ever seen The Golden Compass? Have you ever read the books? Or have you ever played the video game? Feel free to let me know. This is Movie Fan, signing off.